What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Motoring Adventures YouTube channel. I'm Preston, and today we're going to be installing the AEV 2.5 inch RT suspension lift for the 2021 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon 392. They make this lift for any of the JLs from 2018 to 2024 now, but you can specify which exact vehicle or engine that you have on your particular JL, and they will cater it to that specific vehicle. There are slight differences between each of the models, weight differences mainly, and this one, they've made a few little tweaks to accommodate the 392. Some things that you actually won't need, that you would need on the standard V6 lift kit. And also, instead of the standard springs, I went with the HD springs, the heavy duty springs. They're painted this blue color, which I think is very fitting since my Jeep is the hydro blue color. But these are a little bit stiffer, made out of a slightly thicker metal, and they're able to accommodate the added weight of a lot of overlanding gear that you might add if you were planning on taking your vehicle overlanding, or if you tow with it, or you just load your vehicle down a lot. Considering the amount of weight I've put on in my vehicles in the past for camping purposes, or the weight of a rooftop tent and a rack and a winch, those things can add significant amounts of weight to your Jeep. Just want to make sure I have the capacity to hold all that without losing a lot of ground clearance. I have already witnessed a lot of ground clearance lost when towing with the 392 and when loading it down with a lot of gear and loading up with passengers. In previous Jeeps I've owned, such as the 4xe, it is also, it would sag significantly. Now you could just watch the type of trails you go on, but I would like to at least maintain a lot of that ground clearance. And also, the AEV kits I really like. I installed a 4.5 inch AEV kit on a 2016 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon, the JKU, and it was great. What I like about their kits is they reuse a lot of the factory components, and they're made with the ride quality and longevity of a factory Jeep in mind. They reuse all the control arms, but they don't neglect pinion angles and caster angles and that sort of thing. They include geometry relocation brackets with the kit to help make up for those loss in angles, or the increase in an angle when you lift the Jeep. And it helps keep it riding fairly stockish. In fact, sometimes some people say it rides better than stock, and it just helps with the longevity of your factory bushings and components, which are built to last a long time. And those parts are readily available should you need them. I mean, you can go on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and oftentimes find these takeoffs from people who have lifted their Jeeps, and for relatively good prices. Also, the Bilstein shocks, they're excellent shock. They perform well, they ride well. I've had them in the past. They do tend to be a little bit stiffer than some people like, but I think that's because of the fact that they built this with overlanding in mind and added weight. Now, it may come with a sacrifice of some off-road performance, but it's still going to flex and articulate as well as it does stock, at least, and you're able to fit bigger tires. Now, this kit, they say you can fit up to 37-inch tires with the proper back spacing, and you'll experience very minimal to little rubbing at all. I'm just planning on going up to 37s, which isn't a whole lot bigger than the 35s I already have on my Extreme Recon package. So I think this will be a good mix. It'll allow me not to, it's not going up insanely high where I have to do a lot of extra modifications to the Jeep. It's something I can install here in the garage with the tools I have. It doesn't involve, doing things like replacing brake lines, and you will have to loosen every control arm bolt, but you won't have to be replacing control arms and measuring and tuning them. So it will require me to get an alignment afterwards. That's always the case with any lift kit you install, but it's a pretty inclusive kit. It even includes the AEV ProCal snap, which allows you to recalibrate for larger tires, different gearing, that sort of thing. All right, well, enough of me rambling on. Let's get the Jeep in here so we can install this, take a few measurements, and get on with the install. Okay, Jeep's in the garage. Made my little scientific measurements here. Measured from the floor going up the center of the wheel to the top of this extended lip that comes on the fender flares of the Extreme Recon package. This thing didn't come with instructions, so I had to print these off online. So be aware of that if you look at it on a device or you'll need a printer. Everything that's included with the kit, required tools, basic, standard, and metric, hand tools, a torque wrench, jack and jack stands. Here's the assumptions. You can see the instructions are pretty clear and illustrated. All right. First thing we have to do is get this thing lifted up. I'm going to do the rear suspension first. Here my jack could use some oil. Now you're going to want to get it up pretty high because you're going to want it to be high enough to droop this axle. Factory springs out and the new one's in. I don't like how that's just sitting on one corner of that. The problem is the gas tank skid plate's really close to the frame here. I guess that's just gonna have to do. Now you're gonna want to keep the center of the axle supported by the jack. You're gonna use this to control the lifting and dropping of the axle. With a 22mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our rear wheels. Be sure to have your wheel lock handy if you have wheel locks. Using an 18mm socket and ratchet, or in this case impact, we're going to remove the rear shocks. And you're going to reuse the hardware. All right, the upper end of the shock is going to require you to get a little creative. It's kind of behind all this trim. Might need an extension. Have a shock. Okay, step 3, loosen but do not remove all 8 control arm bolts and both track bar bolts. What it doesn't tell you is that this will require a 21mm socket and 21mm wrench. Well, that one doesn't need one. And this one uses a flag nut. How loose is loose? I'm gonna use extension on this. All right. Good and loose. Not that loose. Not that loose. Oh. Okay, on to step 4. Remove the sway bar end links and save mounting hardware. 392 vehicles will reuse end links. Be sure to note the orientation. Okay, the sway bar end links use 18mm hardware. Get this started and then Gas engine vehicles only. Remove sway bar from the frame and discard hardware. Okay, now we're going to remove the sway bar and flip it. Flip it and add spacers. $392 Hemi vehicles only. In addition to the sway bar spacers, sway bar also needs to be flipped. Flipping the bar will lower the arms that attach to the end links and prevent contact with wheel tire at full suspension rebound. All right, let's flip it. All right, it's flipped. I'm going to take these new M10 bolts. At least threaded. I should try to hand thread it. Doesn't want to. There we go. Where's the extension? God. All right, now that the sway bar is flipped, you see this drops down much lower, and that's what the instructions were saying. Flipping this allows this to droop more and clear, but then I'm kind of concerned about this. I mean, yeah, this bolt is out, so I guess once that's fastened in there, this will clear that, because this still has a lot of, and we'll be putting a bump stop right here, but that could still be in that realm. But I think it's just far enough back once that's fastened that this won't touch, I hope. There's your spacer. Now you're supposed to torque these to 50 foot-pounds. I think I've probably exceeded that already, but definitely a good idea. Yeah, well above 50 foot-pounds. On step 5, we will lower the axle and remove the springs, making sure not to overextend a lot of the wiring and cables. Before lowering the axle, I'm going to disconnect this locker wiring. Oops. Pull that locking tab completely out. All right. Wow. That's good and loose. Still worried about why this is all greasy. I think that'll be all right. All right, let's lower this thing. Worry about the e-brake cables. It says you don't have to disconnect them, but I'm pretty sure about that. All right, now that we've removed the springs, it's a special note for the 392 Hemi models. You do not have to install this rear track bar tower, and it did not come with it. So skip to step 8. And step 8 is install springs, but be sure to install the rear spring shim to the passenger side axle. Here's your shim. And it goes right here. Looks like. I just checked the springs to make sure there wasn't a left or a right, and it looks like they're identical. Now it looks like the spring perch came out, so you got to make sure that A, this aligns with this right here on the perch, and that this goes through a hole up there. Easier said than done. I am going to use some Gorilla Tape.
think it'll hurt it if it stays there. This stuff is ultra sticky. There we go. Alright, that's one spring. There's no way on this side. Actually, no. Good. Springs are indexed.
Step 9 is to install the new rear shocks at the upper shock mount using the factory hardware. Now, reinstall the lower shock nut and bolt. In step 11, with the Rubicon 392, you will reinstall the factory rear sway bar links using the factory hardware. Step 12 mentions not installing rear bump stop spacers until after the control arms are torqued. But I found that having the Extreme Recon package includes 1-inch rear bump stop spacers already, and there was no accommodation for adding the AEV spacers to these. So that step can be skipped.
We'll take this opportunity to reinstall some clips. Hopefully I don't get a code.
Step 13 is to reinstall the rear wheels and tires and tightening the lug nuts using a star pattern. You don't need to tighten the track bar or control arm bolts at this time, as these will be torqued after the front suspension is complete. The first step is to raise the Jeep and support the frame with jack stands or a hoist. Be sure it is high enough that the springs can be removed. Support the axle in the center with a jack and remove the wheels. Steps 2 and 3 are to loosen, but not remove, all 8 front control arm bolts and both front track bar bolts.
Here's the heat shield. Looks like it takes a 2 10 millimeter bolts to take that off. Yeah, lucky guess. Kind of hard to reach, but if you got one of these little mini ratchets, these 1/4 inch, there's enough room. This is the only wrench I have for this size. Okay, it's getting loose. All right, that's a hard one to get to. Looks like it's good old ratchet time. All right, this one's in a precarious position, but this is where one of these comes in handy, a CV adapter. Now I'm wondering if I should use the extension with it or just, yeah. So you pop this on. And disaster strikes. I make better ones of these now that don't have a huge weight. Getting the job done though. Okay, now that we've loosened the control arm bolts and the track bar bolts, it's time to disconnect the brake lines at the frame and the electrical connector for the axle disconnect and the fastener for the axle disconnect also in order to allow the axle to droop. This looks like it's 10 millimeters. Yep. Here's the one on the driver's side. Now I'm not seeing any connectors on the axle disconnect. Does that mean this doesn't have one? I mean, there's a big box right there, but there's nothing connected to it. I guess they just use the same housing, but you don't have it on a 392, maybe? We don't have an axle disconnect on the 392, so we can skip this part. So now on to step 5, we're going to remove the front sway bar links and hardware and save the hardware. And this is where we will have a new set of sway bar links to install even on the 392. Then we're going to remove the shocks in step 6. And then we're going to do this thing where we bend the brake line bracket to give it brake line a little more clearance. 18 millimeter socket. We don't have a lot of room to work with here, so I'm not going to use an impact. Bottom has a flag nut. Get out of there. There's nothing holding it on. And just like that, sway bar link is out. Jeez. Can they put just a little hole in there? Now here's where we have to bend this brake line bracket more of a 90 degrees to the control arm to give this a little more freedom. I'm going to use a pair of channel locks here. Oh, it's not as hard as I thought. It's a rare thing, I said. Okay, and you'll want to confirm this once it's on the ground. And all right, I'm going to deviate from the instructions and go ahead and remove the frame ends of the front control arms, both upper and lower. Since I know I'm going to be installing the geometry correction brackets anyway, and this will allow maximum droop of the axle to remove the springs. So I figured now would be a good time. I'm not sure if I'll, right after that, install the geometry brackets. Actually, that might be one of the upcoming steps here real soon. So. That's... the exhaust is in the way. Great. How are we going to manage that? I don't know if it's bend enough. I mean, it is really close. Didn't find too much about this. I did find a thread about the diesel having the same issue, and they had to end up cutting this bolt. There. Hopefully didn't mess up my exhaust pipe too much. And then there's one upper control arm. Here. You know, I just realized something. You don't want to disconnect your lower control arms from the frame, because then that's what connects, that's what holds your axle in position that it needs to be in. If I take those out, that axle's basically floating there, especially once I get the springs out. The only thing that'll be connecting this axle is the drive shaft. So I'll leave this side as it is. I'll leave the other side connected. There's a few more things I need to disconnect, such as the locker wiring, and there's a few of those little trees to pull out, and then we'll go ahead and lower the axle. Just like on the rear, we need to remove this electronic locker plug. A little hard to see. There we go. And that one has oil in it as well. May want to move this out too. I went ahead and pulled that out from the tube there. We are on step 8 of the front suspension. Lower the axle and remove the springs, but do not remove the factory isolator. And come down slowly. Make sure nothing's binding. Because the 392 has this extra long bump stop here, this might be a little tricky, but oh, maybe not. What the hell? Come on, sway bar. Okay, now we're on step 9 of the front suspension, and it says 392 vehicles do not receive bump stop extensions. It has a, like I mentioned earlier, has a longer bump stop here, so we can skip that step. Although if you have a non-392 one, you'll have to install this urethane bump stop, or this aluminum extension, and then put your urethane bump stop into it. So on to step 10, which is installing the springs. We're gonna have to remove the lower spring isolator and install a spring shim on the passenger side, just like in the rear. And then we'll be installing the springs, indexing them properly, then installing the shocks, and then the new included front sway bar end links. Here's that front shim. There's a hole there. I'm going to line that up. That's what this rubber piece goes into. Looks like it's no longer long enough, but okay, the fun part we've all been waiting for, installing the front heavy-duty springs on the Rubicon 392 XR. Is it really an XR anymore? I guess so. It has the 456 gears still. I might have to cheat again and use tape. Yeah, I'm gonna put some tape on there. Okay. Come back up. All right. Looks like we're indexed down there. Got the shim. The isolator's in place. All right. Time for the other side. Still in there? Yep. There we go. You're gonna lift the axle up just a little. It's pretty much on the ground. Time for the shocks. I'm gonna reuse the hardware. Again, looks like we got it at the perfect height. I'm glad these only go in one way and have a pre-threaded bolt. 18 millimeter. I'm just gonna do these Guten tight for now, and I'll come back by at the end and torque everything. See how good we did. Not too bad. And that is why you should wear safety goggles. Do as I say, not as I do, right? Got my Bilstein RT 5100 shock. I'll go ahead and take this off. It's just going to expand anyway. No. All right, bend back. You go ahead and tell me when those line up. Okay, here's where these safety glasses are worth their weight in gold. Oof. Don't accidentally pull the trigger. Okay. Now we're finally adding some new sway bar links. Uses a slightly different thread up here. It's something about it being more fine or whatnot, but you have to use their included M12. And the bottom reuses factory hardware, except you put a washer on the inboard side. Oh, damn it. This part of the axle's moving inboard, outbound, because it's not connected. Jeez. Safety glasses. But it's lowering it with it. Ah, what the heck? This at all. There we go. All right, I think what I'm going to do now is, instead of fighting the swaying axle to install the sway bar disconnect, I'm going to go ahead and put the stamped geometry correction bracket on this side. So I have the instructions here. And you're supposed to do one axle at a time anyway, and it'd probably be a good idea. That way we can get this part of the axle connected back to the frame and hopefully be able to install that sway bar link at the end there. But since the instructions say that it's a good idea to swap the upper control arms from side to side, I guess, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to remove that other one. Actually, I'll just go ahead and put the stamped brackets in for now. The spacer is going to act as the original control arm. Hammer. These two holes don't want to line up. I don't know why. Is it because of this? Why do your holes not line up?
A few moments later.
After a lot of convincing, finally got it. Put this washer back on. Lovely. Lovely. Thing. The AEV geometry correction brackets use a set of square washers. They have offset holes to allow the caster to be set for various ride heights. I went with the middle configuration illustrated here, as I knew my ride height would be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 inches. So now I have to have the axle rotate a little and come this way. It's about 1.5 inches off. And this does not want to move. Could use the old ratchet strap trick. Once the passenger side control arms were installed, I proceeded to install the geometry correction brackets and control arms on the driver's side. And once all that was complete, and discovering that I did not need to add the rear bump stop spacers as were instructed, I went through and tightened all of the control arm, track bar, shock mounts, and sway bar link bolts to their listed torque specs that were provided in the instructions. Although not necessary, according to AEV, but highly recommended for any lifted vehicle, I was going to install this adjustable front track bar made by TerraFlex that I had previously planned to install on my 2022 Jeep Gladiator Mojave. But it was getting late and fatigue was setting in, so I decided to just have a local Jeep shop install the track bar the next day, along with performing an alignment that is recommended after the installation of any lift kit. Just got the alignment done, track bar installed. Let's see how it drives. Now that I'm home, I'm going to attempt to straighten the steering wheel even more. It was just a slight bit off, but I think I can still get it to be much more straight than it is. All right, and the way you go about doing this is on this bar right here. This is called your drag link. There's an adjuster. To be able to adjust this, you have to loosen this nut here with a 15mm wrench or socket, kind of a long bolt, so you might want a open end wrench. Once you get that loose, you should be able to adjust this. Adjusting it clockwise turns the wheel left or driver's side, so anti-clockwise or counterclockwise should move it to the passenger and should straighten it some. Let's go check it out. All right, it's a little too far. It'll take you a few iterations here. This takes fine tuning. A few more clockwise. That looks about right. And once you get that where you want it, just tighten this 15mm nut back up. And a righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
All right, well, that is the installation of the AEV 2.5-inch DualSport RT suspension lift with the 3-inch heavy-duty springs for the Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon 392. I hope you enjoyed this or found it useful. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and get further updates on the suspension lift as we take it out, test it out on the trail, on the highway, towing, and just anything else we can throw at it. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.